Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We are live with JCAL Talks. My name is Leonard Jacobs. I'm the Interim Executive Director of the JCAL Center for Arts and Learning. And tonight we are inaugurating a new program as part of a series of new programs we're launching this month for Black History Month. Tonight is JCAL Talks. This is a program that is intended to spotlight thought leaders. I'm reading just so I get this right. I want to make sure I stay with the branding. Queens-based thought leaders in arts and culture, education and politics, and civic and community life. Before I talk about our guest, who I think is amazing, and I can't wait to get this conversation started, I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping. This program would not be made possible without the support of our friends and colleagues at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. There were many contributors to our holiday fundraiser back in November and December who decided to support this program and the other programs on our Black History Month slate. I'd also like to very much thank our board of directors and also our staff at JCAL, beginning with our interim artistic director, Courtney French, who it is my joy and honor to work with every day. Tonight, we're going to have a conversation with Melva Miller. When we started to think about who represents a thought leader in Queens, she was the first person that came to mind. She has enjoyed a long and pretty amazing career in both arts and civic life in the borough and for the city more generally. Among her many roles, she served as the executive director at the Sutphin Bid Business Improvement District. She was for quite a time the deputy borough president for Queens. She spent a lot of years working in the Queens Borough President's office. And now she is the first CEO of ABNY. Now, I learned something 5 hours ago. It's not ABNY, it's ABNY, Association for a Better New York. And we're going to have a better New York because of people like Melva running that organization. And ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome Melva Miller.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Leonard. And that introduction made me sound really old. You talked about a lot of things, but I'm really honored to be here and thank you.
I wasn't going for that. I was going for the wow, she's amazing part, because we know you started when you were like 6.
That's right.
Is that we're going with that? I'll do that too. So we've had a couple of conversations, and I have some questions that we're going to talk about, have a conversation. I want to just make everyone aware that we are taking questions. We'll do a Q&A toward the end. Please feel free, whichever platform you're on, whether it's YouTube or Facebook, please put in your comments, your questions. I will be watching the chat, and probably about 20 of 8, we'll get to some questions, hopefully. When we spoke originally, we talked about your roots, which was in the arts, particularly your love of dance and passion for dance. And you did grow up in Southeast Queens. Where in Southeast Queens again? I forgot.
Laurelton, LA.
Laurelton. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you discovered arts and culture and how that informed your work, wanting to work in and for the community, particularly in Southeast Queens, but also for the borough.
Absolutely. So first off, I'd like to just really thank JCAL, the Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning, you, Leonard, and the board of directors led by Michelle Stoddard for inviting me here this evening to kick off your ABNY Talks during Black History Month. It is truly an honor, and I'm truly grateful, and thank you for that. And I'm really excited to talk about my roots in dance. I don't get to talk about it much. This is a great opportunity for me to talk about what I love. And once a dancer, always a dancer. That's my line. So I am a dancer, whether or not I can still touch my toes or not, different other story. But I began dancing really early on. So, you know, my mom first enrolled me in dance school, as she would talk about it, because for some reason she thought I was going to be very tall. And she wanted me to have good posture and walk with poise and grace. little did you know I was going to be 5'6", but it's okay. Because once you start dancing, you don't stop, right? Because as we know, arts and culture brings so much to our lives and enrich our lives in so many ways. I just continued to dance through college, right? So I went to Fiorello H. LaGuardia High School of Performing Arts. I was a dance major, danced in a few dance companies, thought I was going to be a dancer. And then as my family called it, I was going to be the dancing lawyer because I that I wanted to help my community, right? So it was very confusing to them to think how I can mix dance and helping my community by being a lawyer. So they would call me this dancing lawyer. But I always had this drive to be an active sort of citizen in society, right? Like I wanted to contribute to the uplifting of my community, my city, and my nation, and really didn't know how to bring the two together. Went to John Jay College, pursued a track for, thinking I was going to go to law school. And then my best friend and I started a children's dance company. And this was a way for me to continue to give back, but do the things that I love. And what I learned, and I really have to give this to my best friend at the time, we were able to use this dance company with these children as a vehicle to instill civic pride and social responsibility, right? So we were engaged in numerous community activities, whether it was participating in programs at senior centers or whether we did park cleanup days. But it was really important to sort of give back, and dance was the way we hooked the children in and do this. And what I learned from this was that partnerships were extremely important in getting things done in the communities, right? It taught me the values of consensus building. It taught me the values of coalition, bringing multiple organizations with the same mission and vision together to get something done. And, sort of as I sort of transitioned through my professional career and got more engaged in community economic development and sort of that end of community revitalization and upliftment, it was those skills that I learned with the children and the children's dance company to really set the stage for what I would do later in life. So what started out as my mom wanted me not to be slumped over, proposed me and sent me on this career trajectory to where I am today. And I'm extremely grateful for it.
You and I have something in common. I was going to be the actor lawyer,
okay.
And that didn't happen. It's funny. I'm gonna jump from there to where you are now, because that sort of social consciousness and activism informed what brought you to ABNY. You were doing all of this census work in the run up to 2020, and then COVID happened, which nobody was expecting.
Yeah.
We know that historically in communities of color there are undercounts, which is a problem always. But here, as we've talked about before, here was going to be an opportunity where we were going to try to make a structural change and make sure that there wouldn't be an undercount at the sort of level, or any undercount, hopefully, that there had been before. And then COVID happened. But what was amazing was all of this work that you did to sort of support and buttress the census count anyway. And it seemed like you were super successful in that. And I feel like there's a connection between like where you started talking about coalition and collaboration and awareness raising, and how that informed the work that you just finished doing toward the census. And I was wondering if you could sort of talk about that a little bit, because it feels like a lot of the same work, but with so much more experience and sophistication built on what you did at the start of your career. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know how much it was sophistication as it was just sort of doing what I know and what I feel as a community organizer, right? So, a lot of people don't realize or understand how communities get funded through census dollars and through the data that comes from census information. And when I was afforded the opportunity to sort of coordinate this effort on behalf of the Association for a Better New York back in 2018, We really envision this as an opportunity to bring the census stakeholders together to officiate and a coordinated effort for the city, right? And, like you said, a place like New York City is extremely difficult to count. The census is something that is so important, right? That it's Article 1, in the Constitution. It's something that sort of decides how much federal funds go to states and municipalities. It also determines sort of how certain service delivery happens in those areas. And it's simply just based on how many people live here. But it's the largest operation that the federal government conducts, right, every 10 years. There's no other operation as large as the census operation because it's difficult to count everyone. And when you live in a place like New York City, where you have a diverse population, where you speak over 200 languages, when you have a difficult topography with all types of building types and household makeups, and our complicated living situations that we have, it's hard to count all of the people who live here, which means we don't get our fair share of that funding. Now, of that $665 billion that gets distributed annually, it's a competition, right? So if one area doesn't get it, another one does, and it's based on how many people live here. So the key to this, to an effective 2020 census effort, was to be coordinated, right? Was to make sure that government was working with the private sector, who was working with community-based organizations, and we were all saying the same thing, right? We might communicate that differently to different communities because people hear information differently and they receive it differently from people, but the basis of why it's important is the same. So I think for number one, what sort of my history working in community building, in organizing, taught me, and how it prepared me for this, was to make sure that we had a conversation with all the stakeholders first, right? Why is this important, and how are we going to communicate this to all New Yorkers across the spectrum? And then it was also important to start where the communities were, right? Like that's social work 101, right? My master's is in social work. My concentration is community organizing, planning, and development, but you have to start where your client is. And what we found in bringing these stakeholders together, we had to start where they were. So the private sector, right? We had to say, okay, listen, you employ thousands of people. Let's start with communicating to your staff about the importance of the census, and then they can then be messengers in their community, right? Community-based organizations. Let's see, where are you? We know that service delivery is your priority right now. You need to make sure that you are feeding your community. We're making sure that you are doing affordable housing. How do we infuse census messaging into that work so that it resonates and it makes sense? Right? Government, starting where they were. They just need to count people, right? That's their priority. So what was really important was the value that everyone brought to the table in understanding that, and then sort of doing that consensus building and that coalition and community building around the census effort and that issue.
And then COVID happened. So what did you do? Because there's tremendous work in all that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Everything was sort of set up, and this was going to be the year that the census that was going to really change the game.
Yeah. So we had, we started at ABNY in 2018, but a lot of our partners, especially those on the ground, started this work way before us in preparing for the 2020 census, because we understood how high the stakes were in getting sort of people counted, right? So the advocacy work started in making sure that community-based organizations had funding, accurate funding to get out into those communities and reach those harder or historically harder to count communities. Using digital tools, right? That's something that in 2010, we didn't master. We didn't know how to be sophisticated at sort of using those tools. So there was so much preparation and work. We had all these creative solutions. The arts community came in and planned all of these sort of innovative ways to use the arts and culture to get to different communities to talk about it. And then COVID hit. And we couldn't reach anyone face to face the way we had wanted, right? We had the city investing $40 million, just New York City alone, in census outreach. We had the state, designating up to $60 million for census outreach for community-based organizations. And then they said, those street fairs you wanted, those, face-to-face door knocking you wanted to do, can't do it now, out the window because of COVID and social distancing. So we had to shift, right? And this is where we became really helpful because of our resources in sort of the communications and digital advertising world to say, okay, well, let's get our partners up to speed on using digital tools for outreach. We know it doesn't substitute for some of that face-to-face stuff, but we have to do the best that we can. So we created toolkits, we created shareable graphics and translated them in different languages so that communities could use it. We use all sorts of digital advertising. A lot of the city's funding, it was really great. They were able to shift their funds for digital advertising and get on all sorts of digital platforms to advertise about the census. But we had to make the shift and make it quickly. And then, further into the pandemic, we were able to combine PPE distribution and census outreach. We were able to combine food pantry and food insecurity programs with census outreach, stuffing notifications in meal bags. So there was a way we were able to take advantage of some of the recovery and COVID response initiatives to do census outreach. But the things we had planned, there were some really creative solutions on the table, and I really wish we would have been able to do it, but we did the best that we could.
What's great about that narrative is it leans back into this idea of building coalitions and collaborating that began with your roots. We've done a big drum roll for ABNY, but we clearly have to say what ABNY is and does. So for those who don't know, what is the Association for a Better New York?
Sure. So the Association for a Better New York, ABNY, we are a 50-year-old organization this year. We made 50 years. We were started in the 70s where a bunch of leaders got together and said they wanted to help the city during its financial crisis and use their resources and expertise to do that. For example, they prepaid property tax, right? So these were some of the largest landowners in the city. And they said, you know what, we're going to upfront property tax so that the city can have some revenue. Other things that were done included, for many of you on here might not remember the sanitation strike in the 70s when garbage was piled up on the streets. But they sent their private sanitation crews out on the street to sort of sweep the sidewalks. So, we have really been an organization that has leaned into the moment in time, right? The issues of the day being the census, whether it was in the 80s when there was a record number of police officers being shot and bulletproof vests weren't required by the department. We fundraised so police officers could have bulletproof vests. And then we worked with community-based organizations to start partnerships with the NYPD for safe communities. So historically, we've been doing these types of civic engagement, civic events. And really, ABNY is just a broad coalition of corporate, nonprofit, labor, educational, health, cultural, and government leaders who are really focused on exploring and implementing ideas that make the city move forward, right? We want to make sure that we are advocating for the things that make New York City a great place to live, work, and play for everyone, right? We are the Association for a Better New York, all of New York. With more than 300 members in our organizations, we continue to do that by, dialogue, utilizing our resources, like I just explained, and expertise to convene leaders and produce original reports. Just a couple of weeks ago, thinking about COVID vaccine response, we did a poll to understand vaccine hesitancy in New York City specifically. Where are the communities that are least likely to get the vaccine and why? And we created this rich data set that our partners could use. The governor's office has used it, the city has used it, but most importantly, our community-based organizations have used it. So as they talk to their communities about the importance of getting vaccinated, they have some statistics and facts behind it, and they know where the obstacles are. But, we are really an organization that sort of pushes the conversation about, how do we make this a better city? How do we make this a greater city? And as we talk about recovery, as we talk about bouncing back from COVID, we know that going back to normal is not okay, right? Because normal wasn't good for so many New Yorkers, right? We have to make this a more just city, a more equitable city, a more inclusive city. And we are pushing those conversations. And then we have the resources, and more recently, we have become more involved in communities and more implementable in those recommendations as we advocate. So, we will continue to push the city forward, and we will continue to push the city forward with all of New York City at the table, telling us how to do it.
I did notice that the data set for the vaccine hesitancy is right on the homepage, I think, for your website.
It is.
Right now. I did see it there. And I think it's important information for people to have and also be talking about. Like, how do we address vaccine hesitancy? There are important historical reasons why some people may be hesitant, but we're also in a moment of danger in terms of people's vulnerability, particularly in communities of color. And I'm just wondering, what are some of your goals or maybe your vision for the organization? Like a year from today, by the way, you're the first ever CEO. You're the first person to hold the CEO title, if I'm correct, at ABNY. I got that right?
That is accurate. I am the organization's first CEO. Yes.
So congratulations on
Thank
that.
you.
So if it's a year from today, like what's the vision? What are the goals? And Rob McKay just gave you a shout out. So yeah.
Hey, Rob. So, we are really focused on the city's recovery, right? And that includes a lot of things, right? That includes making sure that people feel safe and comfortable to move around and visit New York. It means we need to get people back to work, and we know the way people work will change forever. However, we need to get some normalcy in that, some continuity in how people sort of go back to the office. We know it includes growing the city. We know it includes affordable housing. It includes a broad range of this. But we want to make sure that the policymakers and the agencies who are responsible for implementing these policies does this by incorporating a comprehensive and diverse view of the issues and challenges facing New Yorkers, right? Because it's complicated for a lot of people. And New Yorkers, we do this and we solve these public challenges to ensure that New York City continues to be a place for all those who live and work and play here. So moving forward, there are really three anchors to the work that we are looking to advocate for, push, and help in and fill the gaps. One is ensuring significant investment in the dynamic and diverse population who make up the city, right? So that's the workforce pipeline. That is who's sitting on municipal boards and making decisions, right? How do we make sure that there are opportunities for this diverse talent to really participate in the growth of the city? So really concentrating on this pipeline. We know in order for New York City to stay competitive, we need the talent. We need to cultivate that talent, right? And we have so much talent here in New York. We just need to make sure that we are investing in it. So we are working with organizations and efforts to make sure that that talent pipeline and that is trained in a way that is inclusive and is comprehensive. We also want to make sure that we are strengthening our neighborhoods and communities throughout the 5 boroughs, right? Because New York will continue to grow, right? And if we want New York to be the place we brag about, it must continue to grow, right? We want it to grow equitably. We want it to grow inclusively, and that the folks who have lived here and struggled through the bad times can enjoy the good times. but we must continue to attract industry. We must invest in entrepreneurs and small business, right? We have to invest in, the talent, like I said. So how do we make sure that these neighborhoods and communities are strengthened so that they're really participating and benefiting from these investments that's coming into the city to help it grow? So having these sort of neighborhood perspective and conversations about what does it mean to have inclusive growth in Brownsville, in downtown Jamaica, in Far Rockaway, in these areas across the city. And what are the needs that currently exist, right? Because if we want it to grow, we need to know we need that foundation. We need to make sure that it can sustain this growth. So making sure that there's adequate sewer systems before this stuff happens, making sure that there's open space, making sure that there's arts and culture, right, incorporated in this, but really strengthening our neighborhoods. And then the third really is supporting and advocating for small and large businesses to keep our city as a leader in innovation. People want to come here for a reason. New York is a great place, and we want to make sure that, small businesses, again, are benefiting from this. So, whether it's procurement opportunities for goods and services, as, these large businesses come in, but really making sure that the lifeblood of the city sustains what's happening right now with COVID and then grows after COVID. So those are really the things we're focusing on. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to remind everybody who's watching, please put your comments and also your questions on whichever platform you're in. There's another comment, but I'm going to save it because I'll save it for a couple minutes. But we'd love to have some questions. And everybody loves you, Melva. We're getting comments about how everybody loves you. So it's like, happy Valentine's Day. I'm gonna ask a question related to what you just said, and it's not on our list of questions, but it is related to what you just said, and I think it's so important. The city of New York was always built on small business. Like, my dad was a small business owner, and that was always the lifeblood of the city. There are people who feel pre-COVID that we had kind of lost sight of that a little bit, a little bit too many chain stores, if you will, and not enough mom and pops. And there's been legislation proposed that would deal with rent and, all kinds of other economic incentives. And I love the advocacy work that ABNY does. And I'm wondering, do you have to draw a fine line between where the advocacy stops and the politics begins? Because it is a little bit related, right? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but when you're talking about small business, we're talking about something like 60 or 65% of our businesses are, quote, small business. I think that statistic is still roughly the same in the economy of the country, and I would assume still, I hope, of the city. But we can build on that, not everything has to be a big box store. The city I grew up in, that you grew up in, it was mom and pop everywhere. And I just wonder, post-COVID, how do we get back to that? Is it legislative? Is it activism? Is it is it incentives? Yeah. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, so I think it's a little bit of everything you just said. So first, I want to start by saying the love of my community in Southeast Queens, and particularly Laurelton, came from growing up in a neighborhood where my neighbors owned businesses on the commercial strip, right? This is why I got into the work that I do, right? I would love to walk to Merrick Boulevard with my mom and visit all my neighbors, as they own the photography store or they own the convenience store, right? I was purchasing, I guess I can say this now. I guess it's, I was purchasing cigarettes for my mom at a young age from the convenience store because they knew it was for my mom, right? Because we had that relationship. But the love for not only my community, but sort of commercial revitalization and economic development came from my community and Merrick Boulevard, right? So it is so important and has always been the lifeblood of this city. Innovation has been the lifeblood of the city, and we must continue to do that. Now, when we look at small businesses versus big box stores, we know it's hard to do, and if there are any small business owners on this call tonight, you know it's hard to do business in New York City with the regulations and the oversight. And I'm not saying we don't need that, right? Or some sort of that, but we can't make it difficult for small businesses to operate. And larger corporations and larger businesses have people who handle those things for them. Right? If they have, a fine, or if they're having issues regarding a regulation, they have lobbyists and they have, consultants that they can call on to handle this. Mom and pop stores are in their stores, right? They are dealing with their day to day. So we have to make it easier for small businesses to operate, especially during COVID and post-COVID, because it's not going to overnight be different, right? Once a majority of the population is vaccinated and our numbers go down, it's not going to happen overnight. You talked about the statistics of number of small businesses that has dropped dramatically simply because of COVID-19, right? Many businesses went out of business. So, I think in order for us to boost the numbers and support, it's a lot of things. Now, I will say there is data, and there's a lot of conversations in the scholarship of how big box stores and smaller mom and pop stores can work in a symbiotic relationship, and that in some areas, small stores benefit and like when a big box comes near because of the foot traffic that it brings, right? But it's competition, and we understand how economy of scale works. And if you can buy it less at Target than you can in the smaller, hardware store, for instance, then you are going to be out of luck. So I think, one, we absolutely have to advocate, and advocate. There's nothing wrong, or it's not a dirty word to advocate with that turns political, right? Because right now we are in an election cycle, and there are we're going to elect a new mayor. And I'm going to say in a few months, because in a place like New York City, primary elections determine the results. So, this is something that needs to happen in the discourse around this election cycle, right? How do we support small businesses in a real way, right? It's going to be incentives. It's going to be some legislative remedies, right? It's going to be we need to support small business. One thing that ABNY is doing very simply is working with our 5 borough-wide chambers of commerce to create a business directory that not only identifies businesses by borough, but also if they are a minority-owned business, a women-owned business, a veteran-owned business, an LGBT-owned business, right? Because we have members, larger organizations and corporations, who want to support smaller mom-and-pop stores, right? They want to buy goods and services from the small businesses in the city. So we need to make sure that we are helping them do that. So it's just sort of supporting, small businesses, supporting our restaurants, even if it's just takeout right now. Now we're back open, so we can actually go in, but making a concerted effort to support our small businesses. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things that will really bring small businesses back and make them not only survive, but thrive post-COVID-19.
I can tell you that at JCAL, we have a community first policy around our procurement. So if we have to do a particular thing, it's like, all right, well, who is it's just geographic. It's like, is there a vendor within a mile radius? Is there a vendor within a 2-mile radius? And sometimes something that we might need for infrastructure is sort of bespoke, and we've got to get it from New Jersey, which I hear is that state just to the west of us, but I'm barely familiar with it. But the thing is to, look in our community first and see if we can put those dollars, in the area that we are. Now, in addition to everything else that you do, this was one of the things that I read about you. We talked about this, is you are also working on your PhD. You're a PhD candidate. Do you sleep? You're a PhD candidate in the social welfare program through CUNY's Graduate Center. So I guess the first question is, do you sleep? And do you, can you talk about, do you feel like you want to talk about your thesis and how you've developed that? And has COVID affected your research at all? And just a reminder for everybody watching, we continue to invite your questions and comments. You had lots of comments. We just got a question. It's a great question. I'm going to be excited to ask that one when we get there. So Do you need a nap?
I need a nap, but not because of school. So working on my PhD is actually a very generous way of talking about it because I should be working on it more. But yes, I am a candidate in the social welfare program at the center, at the Graduate Center. And I have been working on my PhD for a while. And the reason why I actually embarked on this very tough journey is while at the borough president's office, we were required to do a policy statement every 4 years, the borough president's office. And leading the economic development unit, I had to sort of talk about how we are engaging our communities in the development of the borough economically, right? Workforce development, business development, all those things, looking at stakeholders. And, I wanted to talk about stakeholder engagement and stakeholder participation in that process and how we developed our programming, but I didn't really have the data, right? I couldn't really say exactly how effective we were because I didn't have a chance to study it. And I knew the only way I could do that is if I went back to school. I never thought I would go back to school. I barely got out of graduate school, right? So going back for my PhD was not in the cards. But I was really interested in the effectiveness of how we engage stakeholders in this process, because that was our platform, right? That's what we said. This is a stakeholder-driven administration. We listen to our small businesses and we listen to our residents around workforce needs, but really wanted to study it. So I applied to the program and I said, if I get in, it's meant to be. And unfortunately, I got in. And I will say for the first year, it was the toughest thing I had done in my life. And my cohort, we were all very, very close. We still are. They still talk about our cohort and how close we were. There was an intervention with me once a week because I was going to quit. I was like, I don't need to do this. I don't understand. I felt like it was hazing. But anyway, I go on a tangent. But
you heard it here first, folks. You heard it here first. Go ahead, sorry.
But I got through the first year, and the second and third year of coursework was fine. And I stayed true to my passion for why I started the program, really looking at stakeholder participation in the way we develop and revitalize our communities. And that's my dissertation topic, right? Really looking at how regular citizens participate in how their communities change and what are the mitigating factors that affect the end results. So I haven't been as focused on it recently as I should, but I am at the dissertation proposal stage, and I am actively staying abreast of the new research on the topic, because you have to make sure that whatever you're producing is relevant. So I have to make sure that my topic is still relevant. And it is, and I think it's going to be even more critical post-COVID. To see how people are, especially historically disadvantaged community members, are participating in the revitalization of their communities. When I look at, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, as sort of things change rapidly, and it's just, again, a course of nature, where we see those communities fall short is when there's not an active or concerted effort to include them in and shape how that happens. And it's not easy, right? Because if it was easy, it probably would have happened. But understanding sort of how these communities can be active participants in the changing and in the improvement of their communities and stay in their communities, I think is only going to be that much more important post-COVID-19.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds like that work is actually even more relevant now, maybe, than when you got hazed. I love that you said that. And it took me forever to get my master's, so I feel it. I really feel it. And because I wasn't a kid anymore when I started, and it's like, when I was young and I had the time, I wasn't focused, and then I was older and I didn't have the time, and I chose to do it, and it's like, oh,
right.
But I had my mom and then I had my mom and dad doing like TikTok.
But
So
for
I
those out there who are considering, it can be done. Don't give up. Like if you want to do it, you can do it. I mean, I've worked full-time, undergrad, graduate school, and while pursuing my PhD. So if you really want to do it, you can find the time, and it is rewarding. So I know I complained a lot about it and it was tough, but I got through it and I'm better for it. So
we invite all of you watching this to go get your doctorate if you don't have it. Then the last question before we move to viewer questions. We talked about, so I wrote this long thing. I'm not going to read this whole thing because I think it's just too long and too complicated. But if you were going to have a conversation with your 18 or 21-year-old self, given the sort of trajectory of your professional career, what questions would your 18 or 19 or 21-year-old self ask you at the stage of life that you are now, and what would you say? It's that thing of like, if you could talk to yourself when you were 18, I know what I would say. I would say be quiet and listen more. And I, but clearly I haven't learned that. But what would you say to your 18-year-old self? I'm glad somebody wrote LOL. What questions would you what would you say to your 18-year-old self?
Yeah, so I think the first question that I would probably ask myself where I am now when I was 18 would be, where did I start and how did I get there? Because where I am now is very different than where I thought I would be when I was 18, right? And something that I always say, and when I mentor younger professionals, and even when I talk to folks even the same age as I am, I always talk about the journey, and this probably has something to do with being a social worker, because the process to me is more important. Like how you got there than you being there is more important. But the journey is so important, right? Because I think that as you sort of work towards a goal and you have your eye on that finish line, you have these experiences around you that get you there. And through those experiences, tons of interesting things happen. And, a lot of times, especially, the younger generation is so myopic, right? They're just so focused on sort of, I want to be this because I want to make $1 million a year or whatever it is. They miss out on sort of the other things that come at them along the way that might alter their journey a little bit, right? And it's okay. It's okay. So, what I would say to my 18-year-old self is, I started out thinking I was going to be a lawyer because my passion was helping disenfranchised and disconnected populations whose rights were being violated, right? So I looked at this large institutional issue, right, in a community of people of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and wanted to do something and thought the only way that I can do it was through the legal system and law. And I found out that there are other ways that you can help. I mean, we talk about the public safety conversation now, right? We're talking about a holistic way to keep safe, right? Not just policing. Policing is part of it, but all of the other resources in between. And I think, if I had sort of just stayed very focused on law school, I would have missed out on so many great opportunities, and I wouldn't be where I am now, obviously. So that would be the answer to that question. The second question is, I probably would have asked myself, because I honestly thought life was going to be over after 25. I was like, it's all downhill after 25, right? Like, why do people still live after 25? But I probably would have asked myself, sort of, is there life after 40? And I would say, from a professional perspective, my life started at 40, right? So the really good things happened to me after 40, and there are tons of great things I think ahead of me. So there's definitely life after 40. Don't give up. And again, sort of similar to the first question, I probably would have asked myself, knowing what I know now, would I have changed my journey or my trajectory in any way? And my answer would be absolutely not. I wouldn't change not one thing I did, even the mistakes, right? Even the things that took me too long to accomplish. I still would have done it because that experience brought something to my life that made me who I am today.
I love that. I think I also thought life ended at 25. I can tell you, in my particular case, my hairline ended at about 27. But that's, I made my peace with that a while ago. We have a bunch of questions that I'm going to turn to now, and I'm not going to do them in order. I'm just going to sort of jump around a little bit. Can you speak to the educational arm of ABNY and the type of programs that are out there for youth getting ready for college? And that's from Shankwa Harrison.
Sure. Hi, Shankwa. So the educational piece that we do at ABNY is generally through our young professionals. And we are actually looking at expanding that for younger residents, New Yorkers, right? But right now we have a very robust young professional program where we have, I think, 7 different programs where we take this large group of New Yorkers and we put them through, like, for instance, we do ABNY Talks where we have it's more educational and we bring professionals in the industry to come talk to them about a policy issue. We have boardroom breakfasts where we have young professionals, they go into an executive's, well, now it's virtual, it's all done virtually, but they would go into a boardroom and the executive would explain to them how they got to where they are. We have a What's on Tap programming, which is a bit more less formal. Pre-COVID, it would be in a bar or someplace very social, and there would be drinks. And
Remember that? Remember those days? I miss those days.
Right? Oh my gosh. But we would have like sitting commissioners, again, come talk to our young professionals. But we have a very robust educational and continuing education program for our young professionals. As we look at that anchor of pipeline, like I talked about earlier, we're really looking at opportunities for younger folks, right? So 18 to 24. How do we, mentor not only young people as they are getting out of high school and thinking about career choices and connecting them to our membership? We have a rich network of great opportunities and great mentors. How do we make that connection? But also, provide some paid internship opportunities with them. So, we just recently did a survey of our members and we asked them would they be interested in participating in a program like this, and hands down, they all said yes. So those are the programs, the educational programs. And then we have on our larger ABNY membership network, we have these panel discussions where we educate our members on different and relevant issues. Like last month, we did one on voter engagement. So that included ranked choice voting, that included the upcoming election cycle, the way voting has changed with early voting, new deadlines, things of that nature. So we continuously keep our network abreast of current policy issues and educate them on those things.
An awful lot of people don't understand ranked choice voting. That's really important to talk about because that's the I know we have that in New York now. That's the direction that I think that we're going to be going in. We have another education related question, but it relates back to your dissertation. It's from our friend of JCAL, Margaret Vendry's Fine and Performing Arts Chair at York College, who asks, who is the audience for your dissertation topic?
Yeah, so I am, my dissertation project will be a case study analysis. I'm going to look at one particular case. So the usability obviously will not be a broad range, but ultimately what I'm really interested in is a best practice document, right? And I'm really hoping to do this type of work on a national level. How do we really engage stakeholders nationally as communities, especially urban centers and cities across the nation change? And the audience is policymakers, right? Because the type of projects that I'm looking at are what you would call government-sponsored projects, right? So projects where an arm of government comes in and says, we want to do this revitalization project, and a key to this is stakeholder participation. All right, how do we improve this? How do we make sure that it is meaningful participation in this? So the audience is really policymakers. Eventually on a national level, but my project specifically here is just a case study analysis.
Awesome. We have a question from Dawn Cotter Jenkins, our wonderful board member at JCAL, and it says, are there resources for freelancers or independent consultants for in-person meeting spaces with clients? And I guess that would mean right now, despite COVID, are there resources for freelancers of different types and independent consultants who want to do something in person safely? Are there any resources that you know of, either through ABNY or anywhere?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know, because people are still pretty hesitant for the in-person meetings. I know that people are preparing. So for instance, like we're having conversations with vendors who are putting pieces in place to reinstitute sort of in-person interactions. But in terms of resources to sort of help facilitate that, I'm sorry, Dawn, but I will look into it. I can find out if there are any. And I'm assuming you are interested in someone to help facilitate that process of those in-meeting interactions with clients. I'm assuming.
I mean, we can assume that, but Dawn, feel free to
reach out to me.
We'll come back. Now we have a question about the arts, and I'm really glad this is here. It's from Suzanne Leo, who writes, the arts are, and this has been my mantra for many years, the arts are a significant economic driver in New York City. I'm very fond of saying publicly from any rooftop that will have me, there will be no recovery without arts and culture. I actually tend to say arts, entertainment, and culture because I think it's all one. Talk about ABNY's relationship to arts and culture and how you think it, because knowing what your roots are, knowing that what you were talking about maybe about a half an hour ago, the thing that's so striking is you get it. Like, we don't have to preach to you about why arts and culture is important as an economic driver. There are a whole list of reasons why arts and culture is important, but in terms of the multiplier effect that when we have arts, culture, and entertainment, the multiplier effect on our economy, it's a singular moment, it seems to me, for an organization like ABNY to sort of like push that forward. Can you talk about ABNY's relationship to arts and culture now, and maybe knowing what we know about you, in the future?
Yeah, so yes, right. I don't have to explain to anyone on this call about the importance of arts and culture to this city and the growth and revitalization and continuous growth of the city. Not only is arts and culture important as for the secondary economy, right? So you have the producers and makers of art, and you have the institutions that sort of present it. And then, what that does in terms of tourism, right? Because again, one of the things that we are very concerned about as one of the primary drivers of the economy is tourism in New York City, right? We're suffering. We don't have that. Broadway is not open, right? The cultural institutions are, not operating, right? We have the smaller performance art spaces that, have social distancing and all these requirements about how do you open up safely and what that means for them and their funding and their funding sources. But then you also have the secondary economy that comes from it, right? You have, after you go see a show, you go to eat, right? And that's sort of the other part of the entertainment, right? The restaurants. Right. For places like Midtown Manhattan and Times Square, right? You have all of the souvenir shops and sort of all of those things that come with arts and culture that are necessary for New York's economy, right? For it's necessary for us to bounce back. But also what arts and culture does for communities, which a lot of people miss, is what does it mean for bringing people together? When we look at public spaces, right? And we look at how do we use urban design and as we design our communities, and we want these public spaces, it's arts and cultural organizations that program these spaces. And these are places for convening, right? And what that does for society is so important. And it's artists that sort of curates these spaces. what sort of arts and culture does, like we talked about, for young people, right? Like for dance, for example, right? It not only activates and engages young people, it engages their parents. And you can organize around issues, right, based on your kids going to a, dance class on Saturday and then the parents going into the corner, right? There are so many things that arts and culture does for society that people don't realize or people don't see. Just revitalizing neighborhoods. Like we all know how artists have changed and, in a lot of cases gentrified. And when we say gentrified, right, you got the good part plus the bad. You got the revitalization, but then you got the displacement that happens because of the revitalization. And we know the places become interesting and cool because artists moved in and artists are programming in the spaces, right? Whether it's through visual arts or whether it's through performing arts. So, arts and culture does an enormous, has an enormous benefit on the city of New York. And from our perspective at ABNY, we need to support it on all different levels. So whether it is supporting the smaller arts institutions by connecting them with resources, whether it's, we worked very closely with Chuck Schumer, right, on his legislation on the Stages Act, right? So it's really important for us to stay engaged. We are talking about how do we be more practical in supporting the arts, whether it's through small grants, right? We're talking to the Broadway Association. But because arts and culture is across the spectrum, I mean, you have cultural institutions that range from the Brooklyn Zoo to JCAL, right? We have to think about, how do we support it across the board and make sure that they have the resources in these most difficult times because they are one of the largest contributors to the city's economy.
I'm very fond of saying that arts and culture has also led the way in terms of social change historically. I mean, literally through the centuries. Usually it's the artists who are the canary in the coal mine. Signaling that there are issues that need to be addressed to evolve society further. We did get a little clarification from Dawn. I think we'll make this the last comment. So she was referring to physical/facility resources, possibly to rent workspaces like WeWork, which is actually a great question. It's like, are we going to get back to Suzanne Leo said, yay, grants. And Dawn put a second comment in saying post-COVID-19 would be appropriate, of course. So I guess in a way, the question is, what is the future of co-work?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if you have I don't know what the answer to that is. I wonder if anybody does.
So, I mean, I think that's a great question because it is very timely. And I think as we recognize and understand the way people work will change forever post-COVID-19, understanding how we utilize space is extremely important, right? So this concept of working from anywhere started before COVID-19, right? If you look at someone like me who was consistently in the field, I had 2 offices, and if I was in the office one day out of the week, that was a lot because I'm in the field all the time. So as we think about ground floor retail, as we think about making spaces convenient for the way people need to live now, there's going to be this flexibility in space, and these conversations are happening, right? There are consultants and experts sort of reimagining how retail and commercial space look, particularly in Manhattan where they're suffering, so that it is a bit more flexible, right, for employees, and co-working space. Place like WeWork, I mean, I have to say, we just moved out of a WeWork and we moved into donated space because it was free. But that's a co-working environment we moved into as well, right? So, we were given some space by one of our board members in their offices to sort of help with the time. So I absolutely say yes, the way people will work in using space will change. Are there resources to do it? Yes. I mean, I've spoken to, real estate owners that have given dance company space, like Harlem School of the Arts did a program with donated space. So it's just about finding actually that coordinated resource that sort of inventories that, which I don't think it exists, and then make it available for people who are interested in using that.
Well, maybe JCAL will build it. Who knows? Could happen. Melva, it's exactly 8 o'clock. I want to
Oh,
thank you so much for taking an hour and helping us to inaugurate JCAL Talks. You're wonderful and amazing. The comments, like everybody loves you because they really do love you, and you're a treasure. So thank you. Next time live, like in a room, like human beings.
yes.
But thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, everybody who has been watching this conversation. We will be doing another JCAL Talks in March and then another one in May. Not going to reveal the guests yet. You're going to have to pay attention to our press releases and our marketing and PR. But it could not have started with someone more wonderful than you. Thank you so much for doing this with us tonight. And
thank you
everybody else, thank you, everybody. Have a great night.